Ms. Brittany, thank you very much for that introduction. Good morning, everyone. She said, my name is Scott Tyson. It's a little odd. It is Tison, not Ty, but that's okay. We're still going to have a good presentation anyway. And as Ms. Brittany said, we did come to talk about Work Zone. I've got a lot I want to pack in about 50 minutes or so, and then I want to leave time for questions and whatnot for all the individuals on the call. So let's go ahead, and I'm going to share my screen, and we will get started. Thank you very much. All right, and as we stated, this is our webinar Wednesday, and this is going to be dedicated to work zone traffic control. And it's very timely that we host this session this morning because this is National Work Zone Awareness Week around the country, of which, of course, Kentucky participates. Florida's participating. I'm participating in person because I'm at my local public works department. As soon as I step off of here, I'll go back to my intermediate maintenance of traffic or temporary traffic control course. And so I appreciate everyone coming and being a part of this. Just give a little bit of a foundation of where we are and where we're going to go. I need you to understand a couple of things. They're very basic things, but the whole point of temporary traffic control is to create a safe environment, to find an efficient way to move our motorists through our work zones. But we can't forget about those. There's more than just a motorist. There's bicyclists that use our bike lanes or use our travel lanes. There are pedestrians that are using our sidewalk facilities or in some cases utilize some of our travel way. And so we want to create an environment that is safe for all three categories of personnel. We want to get them around our temporary traffic control zone. We want to get them through our temporary traffic control zone. And all while we're doing that, we're also concerned about our safety and protecting our workers and our equipment. So there are a lot of factors in play that we deal with. I'm going to tell you right now, we don't have time to cover every possible thing. Although the Kentucky LTAP does a wonderful job in the work zone training, they can certainly give you much more than I can in the next 45 to 50 minutes. But every work zone is going to be different. You're never going to have the same issue all the time. And so there's different types of things that you need to be thinking about when you're putting together your work zone traffic control plan. For example, is this going to be a long-term project? And are we going to be stationary? In other words, are we going to be sitting in one place? And the definition that we use in Kentucky is work that occupies a location more than 3 days. That's considered to be long-term. Is it going to take that long? Is it going to be less? For example, could it be an intermediate term stationary operation? That means work occupies a location for at least 1 daylight period, but up to and no more than 3 days. Or maybe it's nighttime work and it lasts more than 1 hour. That is considered to be intermediate in terms of our time duration for our work. Maybe the project is pretty quick. It's a short-term duration. It's daytime work. It occupies a location for more than 1 hour within a single daylight period. We'll be done by the end of the day. That could be a project that we may have to do, and there may be additional considerations for that, or short duration. In other words, we're not going to be out there super long at all. Maybe we're just throwing some rock down. Maybe we're just patching potholes, but it's going to be work that occupies a specific location for no more than 1 hour at a time. We may also have mobile operations where we're intermittently moving. We're stopping every once in a while, but not for a long period of time and then continuing on. Or it may be a mobile operation where we're constantly moving. So all of these questions are factored into what kind of work is it we're going to do and what are our challenges. For example, where are we working? Where's the work zone going to be? Is it on the road? Is it on the shoulder? Is it off the roadway? Are we talking about working for sidewalk facilities? Are we going to have to channel those pedestrians and bicyclists to a different area? Is a detour going to be involved? Are we working near an intersection? All of those are important questions we have to ask ourselves when we're laying out how our work zone is going to be prepared. Other things I want you to think about is, well, what kind of road are we really talking about? Is it a city street? Is it a high volume road? Maybe it's a rural road and low volume, no more than a couple cars every 5 minutes. There's not a lot of vehicles out there. Maybe some farming equipment every once in a while. That may affect how we do our setup. The other question I would ask is, well, how fast the traffic actually going? And you all can feel free to place this in chat, but if you're in an area that has a 45-mile-an-hour roadway, what are people really driving on those roads? It's a 45-mile-an-hour road. What are they really driving where you live and where you work? But it's a critical component. How fast is traffic really going? Do we know? Do we have any information? Have we done our research? I know that we have some chats coming in here. If it's 45, people are saying it could be 55 to 60, 55. Seems to be a pretty consistent answer. So we know that our motorists, unfortunately, are probably driving faster than the speed limit that's posted. And so we take that into account as well. And then we have to ask ourselves, how much traffic are we dealing with? For example, what time of day is it? Is it in the morning time when there's either the school rush or people trying to get to work? It's going to be a heavily traffic volume area, and that's going to put a lot of pressure on us. It's going to cause a lot of hurt feelings on the part of the motorists. Is it later in the day? Is it 2:30, 3 o'clock, getting close to time when everyone gets off of work, is getting out of school? We're going to have a lot more traffic on the roadway. Is the work something that we can reschedule for a time where there's not going to be as much traffic condition, not as much of a high volume? Is there a home football game in our city that, hey, that's got a lot of people coming in from out of town. We can't be tying up the roads that way. So all of those things are road and traffic conditions that I want you to consider when you're planning out your work zone. How about this? Will the nature of the traffic of the work that we're doing, will the traffic change once we're underway? Will it affect our work? If it does, then we need to take that into consideration beforehand. And then I would just simply ask you this. Do you have a good relationship with your law enforcement, your local law enforcement agency? And if so, that's wonderful. And this is really going to be helpful to you. Will local law enforcement be notified? Perhaps we need their assistance in slowing people down. Little blue light never hurt anyone. A little slowing people down, that's not a bad thing. That's a good thing. But what about emergency workers, emergency responders? If we're going to be taking up roads, do they need to be let know ahead of time? I think they do. Perhaps they can reroute themselves a little bit. We don't want to have emergency vehicles coming through. Let's say we're having a flagging operation. Well, then we've got to stop everybody on each side and let those emergency crews work their way through. So we need to be sensitive and concerned about the needs of law enforcement and emergency personnel in what we do. Now, just to give you a little bit of an idea of what we're talking about in terms of temporary traffic control signage, we need to determine what kind of signs are going to be required. Now, we'll look at that as we go through it here a little bit this morning, but you want to ask yourself, is this a flagging operation? Are we losing a lane? Are we merging people? Are we just shifting people around? Is it a shoulder that we're working on? Depending on the kind of work we're doing is going to determine the type of sign and the sequence that we have to have. Some sequences only have a couple of signs. Some sequences have many more. So we need to determine what sign we need by the kind of operation it is. And then the next question is, what are you actually going to put out there? Once you see the signs and you know there's something coming, what are we going to do to channel the motor public? We'll hear the term used, channelization, channelizing devices. What that simply means is we've got to point and direct the motoring public or the pedestrian public or the bicycling public where it is we want them to go. We want to delineate that. And the best way to do that is to point them, to show them, to make it simple on them so they don't have to worry and be confused about what we're trying to tell them. And so you would ask yourself this question: which of these devices works best for our road users in the area that we work and we live? Would it be cones? Maybe drums. Maybe they're a more of a larger target. They give a good value. In other words, people see those things and they really don't want to run into them. They look very formidable. Now, in reality, these things break away. They snap there at the bottom. They have to break away. They have to be yielding. They have to be crash worthy. So that plays a part in determining what type of device you want. But we don't tell everyone that. But yeah, they'll mess up your vehicle if you hit them. But some people want to be very careful around them. Maybe that's a better use of your devices. Maybe you're shutting down a travel lane and you need an arrow board out there to let the motorists know that you are shutting down that lane. Now, there are 4 types of arrow boards: type A, B, C, and D. Type C is the largest arrow board. That's the 96 by 48. And honestly, that's the one I've dealt with the most. So I have the most experience with that. It's about the size of a sheet of plywood, basically. And you can see that at approximately a mile away. Now, that's on a flat road with no obstructions around you. That is about the distance you should be able to see that. So do we need an arrow board out there? And then what mode does the arrow need to be in? Do we need to turn the arrow on and tell people to get over? Or are we just warning them that we're out there? Do we need to use the 4-corner caution mode? So those are some things. that I want you to think about when you're putting together your traffic control plan. And then lastly here on the slide, do we need a flagger? Is it a two-lane, two-way road? Is it a flagging operation? If so, we need to have flaggers on both ends. We need flaggers that are trained, they're certified, they're qualified to do the work. They've gone through the course, they have a certification card. If they are required, that's going to change some of the signs that we're going to use. It's going to change how we lay out our tapers, which we're going to talk about here in just a little bit. So some of the questions that I want you to consider as we're going through this presentation. Now, we're going to go through the 4 parts of a work zone because there are 4 parts to a work zone. And the first area that you come to is the advanced warning area. And it does exactly what it sounds like. It gives advanced warning to the motoring public that something very soon is going to be encountered by them. It's something they're probably not expecting and something they're not used to. And so we calculate the advanced warning area from the very first sign that you will come to the beginning of that transition area, or what we would call the taper. That's going to tell us what is our distance for the advanced warning signs. How far apart should those signs be? Well, we have a chart that we're going to give you here in just a few minutes. But you're going to start out very simple and very basic. For example, road work ahead, very generic, very simple. Could be utility work if you're doing a utility project. The important part is that you are giving the motorists enough time to recognize there is an issue. Now, let's use a 3-sign sequence for just a moment. Now, I realize every setup doesn't have 3 signs only, some more, some less. But let's just talk about a 3-sign sequence for a moment. That first sign in the advanced warning area is really as if, and I won't yell at you, but it's as if that first sign is yelling, hey, wake up, pay attention. We're out here. That's what that first sign does. It lets people know, oh, something's fixing to happen, something different that I'm not used to. The next sign basically says, now that we have your attention and now that you're awake, here's what we are doing out here. This is the operation that we're doing, the type of work that we're doing. Now, we're not going to put every bit of information on the one signs. Those signs would be massive. Okay, so we have to give them a short burst, and they're signs that are approved at the federal level and at the state level. So we let them know we're out there, let them know what we're doing, but we also need to let them know what we are going to ask of the motorists to do. If it's a flagging operation, we're going to ask of them, hey, please pay attention to this man that is out here doing their work, that is trying to control you, telling you when to go, telling you when to stop. We need you to pay attention to that. If you're losing a travel lane and you're shutting down a right lane and you're merging people over into an adjacent lane, you want the signs to tell people, hey, the right lane is closed ahead, or the right lane is closed. And we'll put one of those merge symbol signs up there and say, hey, please get over, because at a certain point, you're going to come up on our taper and we don't want you running through it into our buffer space. And so that's what the advanced warning area does. It serves as the initial warning that something is taking place on this roadway that is out of the normal realm of experience. And remember, we're always dealing with the sum of drivers' experiences. In terms of a work area, again, there are 4 parts to it. You have your advanced warning area, which is used really by these 3 little symbols right here. It's just showing 3 signs. Could be more, could be less, but that's our advanced warning area. We'll talk about our transition area, which is this taper area right here. We have our activity area, which encompasses the buffer space, the workspace, and the traffic space. Then we have what's called the termination area. That's where we have a downstream taper where people are alerted, it's okay to go ahead and get back into your lane. That'll be fine. Now, let's talk about some of the signs you're liable to see out in the field. Some of these are work zone signs, some are signs that are already there. For example, it's not uncommon to see a yellow or an amber colored sign. That color is specifically a warning. It is to let you know, under normal circumstances, that there is a condition located at that roadway that is constantly in place. For example, we have a lane that is merging here into this lane. That's not going to change unless we shut down that lane or take that lane away. This sign is going to be there in perpetuity until we change the design of the road. So that's a sign that even if we had a work zone set up, it would probably stay there. Here we have a stop condition up ahead. It is a warning that there is a stop condition. it doesn't impose legal liability on us. It just tells us you're going to get to a spot where legal liability can be imposed. So that's what a warning sign does. We have regulatory signs. Now, they're not all this shape and they're not all this color, but the majority of them are going to have a white background with black lettering on them. And these are the signs that get us in trouble as road users. They're the ones that impose a legal liability on us. For example, if I don't stop for pedestrians in a crosswalk, I have opened up myself to a civil penalty. I can be cited. What if the speed limit, as we said this morning, is 45 miles an hour, but I decided that's really the starting speed, not the maximum speed. I'm going to do 70 in a 45. Well, unfortunately, more than likely, law enforcement is going to take issue with that, and they're going to cite us pretty severely because that speed limit sign is a regulation that we are required to follow. If we don't follow it, then there are penalties that come with it. So we have our warning signs. We have our regulatory signs. They impose legal liability. There's also our guide signs, something similar to this. And more than likely, you'll see it at intersections. You'll see them on the interstate. Oh, if I go right, it takes me to one area. If I go to the left, it takes me to a different roadway. They're guiding the motorist where it is you want us to go. Because remember, you have people that are from out of town. Not everybody knows where exactly things are located. So we're trying to assist the motoring public. And when we talk about these colors, they're very specifically chosen, not because Kentucky thought it was a great idea, but because the MUTCD, the Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices, says these are the colors that are associated with this type of work. Just like for our work zones, orange is the color that is associated with that type of work. In the MUTCD, it specifically says orange is the color of temporary traffic control. Notice that TTC, that temporary traffic control, it starts with temporary. Okay, this is not going to be forever. This is not going to be till the end of time. We're only going to be out there for a prescribed period of time. And that's why orange is specifically designated for that, because hopefully people will see this fluorescent, bright orange color come down and realize, oh, well, that's not something normally I see. In terms of our signage, remember, we're going to have our orange signs in our work zones. That is the color we're going to use. We do not have to take these signs out if those conditions still exist. You can take signs out and replace them with orange signs if you so choose, but it's not a requirement. Now, if you're in a situation where this is going to change, this is not going to be consistent anymore, you can take that sign out. You could cover that sign. But just remember, if you ever take a sign out and that condition comes back, you have to put that sign back. Otherwise, we open up ourselves to liability. For our work zone signs, we want to be careful that we use the correct sign supports, ones that are breakaway. We call them crash worthy. They have to yield when they're hit. Oh, they're going to damage our vehicles, but it should not cause a fatality for the motorist who impacts them. For example, you have a U-channel post that is driven into the ground right here. It's going to break away. It's going to snap at the base right about just above the ground level. It's going to give when it gets hit. It's meant to break away. It's built to handle that. Or we may have sign supports that are for temporary work. Typically, these are for longer period jobs where we're going to be out there weeks on end. For our more temporary jobs, we just put them on different types of sign supports because we're not going to be out there as long. We don't need to have a more permanent sign for the time that we're out there. All right, I'm going to take a step back and I want you all to interact with me. Tell me, have you ever seen anything like this where you work, or where you live, or just in your own personal time? And if so, what is the problem with doing this? Because we want our signs to be seen. I want to hear back from you. And then you can unmute if you choose to do so. And for some of you, you may never have seen anything like this. And that's really good. I'm very happy to hear that. But one of the challenges that we face, whether you're with Public Works, whether you're with the state or local agency or a contractor, is figuring out where to put these signs on some of these roadways that we have to deal with. I want to go ahead and read some responses here as they come. We have one individual, Eamon, We said this creates a really big problem for ADA access. And I'm really glad you brought that up because that's exactly where we were going to go. Jason says it happens all the time. Obstruction of the pedestrian, access route. That's a really great point. So let's talk about ADA for a minute because it absolutely affects what we do in the work zone. Everything we put out there, our signs, or if we're shutting down a sidewalk, we have to make sure that we are ADA compliant. Now that stands for the American with Disabilities Act. It was signed into law by President Bush in the early 90s, and then just kind of sat on the shelf. And around 2011, 2012, then President Obama reauthorized the American with Disabilities Act and ordered the Justice Department to enforce it. And they've been enforcing it ever since. President Trump came on, 2016. He did not change that order. He ordered the Justice Department to continue enforcing the ADA. President Biden's now done the same thing. This is not a political issue. This is we are going to treat people with dignity and do our very best to allow them to have freedom to move around. Now, this picture, hey, these ladies and their kids, yeah, they can move around that pretty well. But what if our friend right here steps in a hole, twists her ankle, falls out into an active roadway? That could be a very tragic event that honestly does not have to happen. I understand it's hard, and Jason mentioned, well, it blocks pedestrian walkways and facilities. It absolutely does. And just because I can handle walking around it doesn't mean that someone who is in a wheelchair or walking with the assistance of a cane to feel and make sure they're in a safe environment, that doesn't resonate for them. That doesn't help them. And so if you're shutting down a sidewalk, and I'm not saying that's what they were doing here, but if you were to, you'd have to come much further up and announce with signage that the sidewalk is blocked. Do not proceed any further. In this case, there's road work ahead. And so what I would say to you is this: you've got to find a different location for this sign. Sometimes this gets very, very difficult because we don't have a lot of right of way to work with. We don't want to put the sign way out there where no one's going to see it out in the field. But it's also challenging if you put it right there between those two trees because it may not be able to be seen because you're going to have a tree that go right down the middle. And even though we know what it says, not everybody knows. And so sometimes it's very challenging placing our signs where they're in an environment they can be seen. But I promise you, it is important, not just for an ADA concern, but for the ability for motorists to recognize them and follow what it is we actually want them to do. Same thing applies to if you're using an arrow board or a portable changeable message sign where you're changing the messages. Don't put it behind something where it obstructs the view at a distance. And then when you're right up on top of it, then you can see it. Because you know what? You've destroyed the whole purpose of having it, is to be able to see it at a distance. And I said the arrow boards are seen about a mile away. Now that's if it's straight and flat, there's no obstructions around it. Portable changeable message signs are usually able to be read and understood at about a half a mile is typically where those will be found. We mentioned guide signs just a little bit earlier, but there's some additional stuff I want to share with you on that. They are rectangular. Obviously, they are green, and that is by design from the MUTCD. It's got the white background. I'm sorry, the green background with white lettering on it. But there may be some other guide signs that actually show up in our work zone, but they're not green because it's a temporary traffic control situation. We're going to have an orange background with black letters on it. It's still going to give guidance to our motorists. For example, here's one: road construction, that's 13 miles. That's giving us guidance. But I'm thinking, is there another type of guidance sign that we put in our work zone? It's not going to be diamond shaped. It's going to be rectangular as well. Anybody have any idea of what sign that might be? And typically it occurs near or at the end. Yep, you're absolutely right. In construction or end road work. That would be in what we call our termination area, where the work zone is ending and the motorists are free to now get back into their travel lane. So those could be considered guidance signs. They're letting us know, okay, you're now you're away from where all the pressure is. Go on with your life. Go have a great rest of your day. One of the other things we talked about earlier were regulatory signs. And I want to just do a little bit here real quick, a little bit more. I said generally they're going to be rectangular, a white background, black letters. That's true. But I just want to remind you, these things right here, that's where our legal liability comes in. It could be a do not pass. Could be, right turn only, or right lane must turn right. Those are regulatory signs, but they're not the only kind. And we know this one, and we've known this one since we were kids. That's stop sign. But I will tell you this: traffic control has come a long way, because for years the stop sign was not red. Does anybody want to take a guess what our stop sign colors used to be in the United States? What color background? What color lettering? Because it was not red. R. Williams coming strong said, "Oh, it's yellow." You're 100% correct. The stop sign used to be yellow. And the reason it was yellow is because it was a warning. It's as if you were saying this: warning, there is a stop condition up ahead. Well, that doesn't have any teeth to it. Oh, warning, there's a train track up ahead. That's good, but it doesn't really have teeth to it. And so what began to occur to transportation officials around the country is nobody's stopping for our yellow signs. Maybe we need to pick a different color. One is regulatory and has some teeth to it. What could we do? Well, we said it's the Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices. That's the federal book. And so they wanted something uniform. And so they looked at our traffic signal and said, well, that red light means stop. That would make a really good color for a stop sign, because that would be consistent with uniform. And so the MUTCD has printed 11 editions currently, but the one in 1948 changed it from yellow background to red background. So if it has a red background, it's still regulatory, whether it's a yield sign, do not enter, wrong way. They're going to have different color backgrounds. They're going to have a red background as well, but it's still regulatory in nature. We are required to follow them. All right, so let's talk about how do we put our signs out there. If you are on an urban roadway and the speed limit is 40 miles an hour or less, your sign spacing is going to be about 100 foot. Now it says A, B, C. It's only showing a 3 sign sequence. Okay, so if there are more signs, we're going to have to add on additional spacing. But 40 miles an hour or less in Kentucky, it's 100-foot sign spacing. Other states have a different number. This is Kentucky specific. If you're on an urban roadway and it's equal to or greater than 45 miles an hour, we're going to suggest a 350-foot sign spacing. Again, that's very consistent with the neighbors around the state of Kentucky as well. But notice, for 5 miles an hour, it could jump 250 feet in spacing. And the reason for that is, for that 5 miles an hour that vehicle's traveling down the road, they're covering a lot of distance. And remember, you want to space your things out so that I can read each sign, read it, understand it, process it, and then figure out what it is I'm supposed to do. And so that's why, as the speed gets higher, the distances get further apart, because we want people to have time to read them, understand them, and then you're on to the next one, rather than trying to put 3 or 5 signs together in order and remember what they were and what they were trying to tell you. That's just too much pressure for the motoring public. If you're on a rural roadway, we say a 500-foot sign spacing, which is even bigger. But think about rural roads. Not a lot of vehicles out there. That means people are driving faster, maybe distracted, maybe playing on their phone right here, and they don't see what's going on. So we suggest, hey, space that thing out further. Give people an opportunity to read it. We all have issues with being distracted sometimes. So help us work with the motoring public, give them an opportunity to survive their trip through our work area. And then if you're on an expressway or a freeway, you'll notice, man, the numbers get massively larger. That first sign is going to be about 2,640 feet from that first cone or that first drum in the taper. Okay. And then that second sign is about 1,500 feet from it. And then this one's about 1,000. So let's do a little math here. If I take 2,640 and 1,500 and about 1,000, what does that come up to? I could do the math here, I think. That comes up to something like 5,140 feet, something in that range. Okay, I'm just doing the math off the top of my head. How long is a mile in terms of footage? Does anybody know? Oh, we have some answers coming in here. Yep, 5280, that's 100% correct. And so if it is at 5280 is 1 mile, we're telling you, you place that first sign, not quite, but almost 1 full mile before that transition or before that taper ever starts. And the reason for that is because that far out at the speeds people are driving on expressways and freeways, you've got to stretch those things out far enough so people can see them. Can we screw up and put our things too close together? We sure can. And on expressway or freeway, that's a recipe for disaster. But on some of these lower speed roadways, can we also screw up and stretch our things too far apart? Yes, we can. And so we want to make sure the motorist has enough time to recognize our advanced warning area, understand what we're asking them to do as well. All right. We talked about signs. This is not good. I guess we should give them credit. They did ballast the hand cart with a chunk of concrete. I guess that's thumbs up for that. But in all seriousness, this is not appropriate for signs in the work. So we want to make sure that we have the correct signs out there. We want to command the motor and public's attention, but also have their respect. And no one's going to respect anything like this. All right. So we've gone from the advanced warning area where we have our signs to now the transition area where we have our taper. That is an angle of cones or drums or channelizing devices that transition me from my normal traffic pattern to another area. Well, we don't have a ton of time to develop this morning, but how do I know how long my taper is supposed to be? I'll just go out there and put down some cones and we'll just guesstimate at it. Actually, we're looking for more than that. Now, there is a table here that's going to help us in terms of our lane width and the speed. That's really, really helpful. For example, if you're on a 45-mile-an-hour roadway and it's a 12-foot lane, that taper should be 540 feet long. That's a lot of cones, but that's what's required of us on a 12-foot lane. So that means you're going to space from one cone to the next, you can space them about 45 feet apart. Now, some of you might be thinking, well, gosh, 45 feet apart seems like an awful lot. What is that Olympic sport, Miss Brittany? Is it a slalom? Is that when they come down the mountain kind of going around things? You might say, hey, motorists might be tempted to kind of do that with our channelizing devices. Okay, well, that's the maximum you can space them. You could pull them in tighter if you wanted to. That's perfectly okay. So we have this table here that really outlines it very simply. Just go to the table and calculate it from there. If you want to do it the longhand way, and there are times that we do that, if you're on a roadway that's 40 miles an hour or less, you take the width of the road, we'll say 12 feet, times the speed of the road, which in this case is 40. And we have to do it twice. So it'd be 12 times 40 times 40 divided by 60. And I think that comes up to about 320 feet. So that's a lot of math that you have to do, but it helps you fill in the gaps because these jump by 10 miles per hour. But that will tell you how to do the ones in between. For a higher speed road, which is 45 or above, you simply say, hey, just take the width of the road times the speed. So if it's 12-foot lane, let's say it's 50-mile-an-hour road, literally it would just be 12 times 50. Whatever that number was, that would be your taper limit. Kind of give you just, again, a little bit more information. There are multiple types of tapers. There is a merging taper, a shifting taper, and a shoulder taper, okay? Now let's talk for a minute, just the differences here. A merging taper, that's the one where you're losing a lane. For example, we're shutting down the right lane on a 4-lane road, so 2 lanes going one direction, 2 coming the other, and we're shutting down that outside right lane. So we're gonna force people, encourage people to get over into the adjacent lane next to them. To do that, we've got to put a long enough taper that gives people the opportunity to ease on over, transition. Now, I know some of you are thinking, well, stop, people wait the last minute to get over. I know that one's not one I can address in this particular issue. But that merging taper says, hey, you need to get people to move over in a safe transition, one that is gradual, not a shock to the system, so to speak. And so when you're putting out a transition taper, you can go to this table right here. We have a question here. Is the width only the travel lanes? Doesn't include the shoulder? No, it only counts the travel lanes. Okay. And that's a great question. So for a merging taper on a 12-foot lane, again, this is going to tell us how long our tapers need to be. And we said back here, go back one up here. Remember we did this math right here? Okay, we could do that here, and I'll show you why it would help to know that. So a merging taper is what's called a full L. That means we did that math calculation. We got the whole distance. When we get to a shifting taper, that's a different number, because remember, a shift means, let's say you've got 3 lanes going one direction. Well, in a shifting taper, no one's losing a lane. I'm just moving your travel lane into a different area than you're used to driving. We put out our channelizing devices. We still have our 3 lanes. We just shifted them a little bit. Well, I don't need to put out hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of feet of channelizing devices like I do for a merge if all I'm telling the motorist is stay in your lane. We've channelized it off. So we kind of corralled you. Just go where we tell you to go. For a shifting taper, that's only half an L. So when you figure out what the full L is, just cut that in half. And that's going to tell you what these are going to be. And that's what they tell you. For a 45-mile-an-hour road, for a merge, it's 540 feet. It's that big one. But for a shift, it doesn't need to be hundreds of feet. It only needs to be half of that L. So we just cut the 540 in half to 270. All right, that makes good sense. But then there's a shoulder closure taper out here. How do we deal with that? What do we do? Well, it's a math problem as well. For example, you are going to take the speed limit and you're going to multiply it by however wide that shoulder taper is going to be. All right, so let's say it's a 45-mile-an-hour roadway, and let's say the shoulder taper is 10 feet, or the shoulder is 10 feet wide. So what is 45 times 10? Well, it's 450. Okay, but then there's something special to this. I want you to make a note. For a shoulder taper, we're just working on the shoulder. We don't need hundreds and hundreds of feet for that either. In fact, it's going to be one of the smallest tapers we use. And for that reason alone, we take that big old number that we did here, that 45 times 10 that equals 450, and we're going to cut that in 1/3. Because we don't want that taper going on forever on the shoulder. That's too much work that's not affecting the roadway. So for a merging taper, we take the big number, the full L, in this case 540 on a 45-mile-an-hour road. If it's just a shift, we're just moving your lane some, just stay in your lane, we cut that number down in half. And then if it's working on the shoulder, we're going to figure out what the width is the shoulder, multiply it times the speed limit, and then cut it in 1/3. And that's going to tell us how long that shoulder taper needs to be. For a buffer distance, and this is more for flagging, but it's also for these as well. When we get into buffers, your buffer distance is based on the speed of the road, and we have a table right here. So on that 45-mile-an-hour road, the buffer is an extra 360 feet just on the other side of the taper. All right, we did merging tapers here and the shift and the shoulder. Here's one I want you to know. It can be called a 1-lane, 2-way traffic taper. Some states call it 2-lane, 2-way traffic taper. It's the same thing. It's a flagging operation. Okay, that means you got a flagger on each end. You're using one single lane, one common lane for both sides of traffic. You got to alternate when they're coming. All right. So remember how we just did a calculation, or we looked at the table, and man, these are some big old numbers. Well, let's say it's a 45-mile-an-hour roadway that we're flagging on. The temptation is to come to this table and go, well, 45 miles an hour. It's a taper, 540 feet. But you don't want a flagging taper that long, because if people come up to it, they're just going to keep following the channelizing devices and go right on around the flagger. But it's so long, that's what they're used to doing. So a flagging operation is different, okay? It's going to be 50 to 100 feet. That's all you get for a taper. You don't calculate anything. The calculation's been done for you, all right? The reason for that is when you're coming down the road, we want you to see a wall of cones. It makes you not slow down. It makes you come to a complete stop. And that is a shock to the system for the motorist. But once you stop, hopefully, that gives the flagger an opportunity to control and direct traffic. On the far end, I will say this, on the downstream taper, that also will be 50 to 100 feet. That will mirror the flagging taper as you go through. And here's the downstream taper, minimum of 50 feet, maximum of 100 feet. Going to space your devices approximately 20 feet for both of them. That's how far apart. You can make them shorter if you want, but it's going to be in about the 20-foot range. Could be a little bit smaller than that, but that's roughly what it's going to be. 5 cones on a 50-foot taper, be about between 10 and 20 feet, depending. So we have done the advanced warning area, the transition area. Now let's get to the activity area where the stuff's really happening. There's a couple of parts to the activity area. There's the buffer space, the workspace, and the traffic space. The buffer space has two different kinds. There's a longitudinal, which is a straight line, which is what you see. That's a straight line, right? And then there's the lateral. There's the side to side.
Oh, I see what you're doing. Okay.
Hopefully now you're seeing the red.
Yes.
The red hat.
Yes.
Okay.
We can. Yes, ma'am. So take a look at this fella who is quote unquote, I clear my throat on purpose, flagging. That fella's there playing on his phone. He ain't paying a lick of attention to me. And when I had to ask him a question, that's what I saw him doing. Y'all, that's not safe. This is supposed to be work zone safety awareness. This is the antithesis of that. This is not what we want from our people. Don't be standing out in the middle of the road playing on your phone. Put the phone aside. You need to be focused on what you're doing. Do the next one if you would. When we talk about positioning your flagger in a safe environment, that's not what we're talking about. Okay, I don't know how the young man got up there. God bless him for being able to do it, but that's not what we're talking about. That's not a safe positioning. You got the paddle stuck in a drum. We just can't. Okay, it's not even a very good taper. It stinks, frankly. All right, one more, if you would. This is a layup. I don't know what fans we have on the call today, but if you're a UK fan or Louisville or somebody else, they tell you to keep your head on a swivel when you're playing football. So he's got his back turned to us. That's a real problem. He needs to turn around and face oncoming traffic. But every once in a while, it'd be good if he'd peek over his shoulder and just see where that traffic's coming from the other end. All right. There's one more picture I want to show, if you would. And I want to give about 30 seconds or so to everybody. Kind of chat in what you see is a problem. We'll play a little game here as we're winding down. What is the issue here? Or what are the issues, I should say, plural? Someone says a very poor taper, someone sitting, no escape route, too close to the vehicle, no advanced warning signs. You're right. There is a warning sign way up that road, but it's post mounted, which means it's probably there all the time. So there ain't no advanced warning. He's sitting down that paddle. He's not raising that thing high enough for people to see coming down the road. You've got a side road right there. He's parked his truck partially in the road. We haven't blocked that road. He doesn't even have lights on his truck. His vest is not a type 2 or type 3 high vis apparel. That's not what we need out in the roadway. And then you got somebody coming the opposite way and he has no idea where they are, what they're doing. And by the way, it's hard for Miss Brittany to zoom in, but there's a wire coming out of that truck window. He's talking on the radio to somebody down there. That's why he's sitting on that 5-gallon bucket. All right. If you would go to the next one, please. Appreciate that. For high vis apparel, it's got to be orange, red, or yellow, green, or some combination of that for it to be usable. And that's for daytime and nighttime operations. You are required to wear something that can be seen at 1,000 feet. That is a mandate from MUTCD, but that's also a mandate from the state of Kentucky as well. And other states, for the most part, have accepted that decision as well. This is just on the next slide, if you would. Go to the one where they have the actual 3 kinds of vests. Type 1 vests are on the left. If you would just, there you go. Type 1s are on the left. They're not appropriate to be used in a right of way. Type 2 are on the right, at the top, type 3 at the bottom. So basically type 3 has sleeves. The rule says the only way we know what type they are, even though we can look at them and tell, is you got to be able to read the label in the back, which was a problem for me when I started doing this years ago because I'd rip the tag out of the back of my neck because it itched my neck so bad when I was out working. Well, nobody told me, but that makes it an illegal vest. So be mindful that it's not just being able to identify what it is by sight, but it's actually being able to read the label. The next slide shows a flagging operation. The road work ahead sign, the 1-lane road, and the flagger symbol sign kind of shows you a bit of a setup. I'm happy to share that with people as well. That comes from the Kentucky flagging manual. And then here is the state standard on a roadway. They show road work ahead, 1-lane road ahead. They add in a be prepared to stop sign and a flagger symbol sign. Most of the time, the be prepared to stop sign is optional, but it is used on a state setup.